recording, and we're going to get started. So good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Kopchak. I'm the Vice President of Operations with Worth Ross. I'd like to welcome everyone to our second speaker series event for 2021 and appreciate everyone being able to join tonight on short notice. We know the invitations went out just yesterday, and happy to have a large group with us tonight. For those of you that are joining for the first time, we welcome you. We've designed these events to bring you industry-leading experts so you can gain some valuable insight, learn best practices, and have the opportunity to ask questions here at the end. Before we get into much further into the conversation for tonight, just want to let everyone know that we are recording this session, much like all the others, and it will be available on the YouTube channel, and we can distribute the link once it's live on YouTube and ready for distribution. We just want to make sure all of our team members and board members have all the resources and tools they need. So with that, we will lead into today's topic, which is navigating association insurance claims. And with me tonight, we have Grant Niedenfear. Grant is a shareholder with Riddle Williams, and his topic of discussion for tonight will be managing association insurance claims, particularly with the aftermath of Winter Storm Uri. The format for this evening will be similar to all of our previous events. Grant will be presenting for about 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up for question and answer after that. If you have any specific questions as Grant is presenting, you're welcome to chat them to me, and I will bring them up to Grant once he is done presenting. With that, Grant, I'll pass it over to you. You can share your screen and take it away.
Okay. Let me do one thing. All right. Hello, everybody. I can't see you. Hopefully you can see me, but my name is Grant Niedenfear. I'm an attorney at Riddle Williams, like Matthew mentioned. It's a pleasure to be with you guys on short notice. I appreciate you guys inviting me to talk about condominium insurance. I know you guys have been affected materially by what's happened over the last week, and I know you guys are working hard, and I'm sorry with with what's going on, but want to try to hopefully help with some information on condo insurance and kind of navigating insurance and related issues with the storm. So without further ado, just kind of want to jump into a presentation. We're going to try to run through this and then free up as much time as possible to discuss any questions to get you guys some answers. So let's jump into the slides real quick. Just kind of what we're going to mow through. We're going to just kind of do a real quick refresher on the types of policies that condominium associations should buy and that you guys probably already have. We're going to focus primarily on your property casualty policy and some particular discussion points related to these weather-related claims. Legal authorities, which legal authorities apply to which condominium associations. Going to show you some examples of language in both policies and governing documents to highlight some of the key issues we're going to bring up. Discuss insufficient insurance, underinsurance, and deductible. Going to tell you a story that kind of highlights some concerns, and then deal with lawsuits, claims on another end that might tie into owners that complain or feel like we've collectively done something wrong. So let's jump into this here. Policy types. Well, we have one main type of policy for protection of our property, that being our buildings. For condominiums, that being the common elements in the units, and that's our property casualty policy. I know you guys are wildly familiar with that. Then you have your policies that protect against lawsuits. Your two main ones are your general liability policy and your directors and officers policy. I'll talk a little bit more about those later. Fidelity coverage and fidelity bond coverage, that covers theft. And then two main policies that I want to just point out, the excess and umbrella coverage. And these two policies can also apply to your property. These fit over the top of all these other policies that I've mentioned, provide additional policy limits, sometimes expand the amount of coverage that's there. The best part about them is they're inexpensive. So if you don't have an umbrella and excess policy, I would suggest talking to your agent, going out and purchasing one, they can be wildly useful in situations like this, where we're going to have a property claims. We could have significant repair damage on property claims, and potentially stemming out of this whole thing, lawsuits where we're going to really be exhausting our coverage. So let's talk about property insurance. That's the name of the game with respect to, we've had these weather events where we've had low temperatures, power outages, pipes freeze, pipes burst, and flooding in the common elements in units. So what legal resources, what legal authority is out there that deals with condominiums and insurance for condominiums? Here are our resources. The Uniform Condominium Act, specifically Section 82111. Chapter 81 of the Texas Property Code, that's the original Condo Act. Got those 3 sections listed there. Those 3 sections really don't say a whole lot. Where we're going to be spending most of our time today, and where you guys are going to be spending most of your time in addressing legal issues with respect to insurance, is going to be 82111 and your governing documents. And by governing documents, I mean your declaration and bylaws specifically. So what of these legal authorities apply to my condo association? Well, as I'm sure you guys all know, Chapter 81, the original Condo Act, applies to condominiums that were created before January 1, 1994. January 1, 1994 is really our line of demarcation. If your condo association was created after January 1, 1994, meaning created, the declaration was recorded in the county's deed records, then the Uniform Condominium Act fully applies to that condo association, okay? But that's not where the analysis ends. Certain provisions of the Uniform Condominium Act can and do apply retroactively to condominiums created before January 1, 1994. Section 82.02C of TUCA it provides this retroactive provisions, and one of those provisions just happens to be our insurance provision of TUCA 82111. Okay, so what this means is, if you are a condo that's created after January 1, 1994, TUCA and 82111 apply. If you're a condo created before January 1, 1994, TUCA and 82111 apply, with an exception. We'll get to that here in a second. The exception. Even though TUCA and 82111 applies retroactively, there's a provision within 8202 that says TUCA and its provisions do not invalidate existing provisions of the declaration, bylaws, plats, or plans of a condominium for which they were created or recorded before January 1, 1994. So what does this mean in particular for these pre-TUCA condos, pre-January 1, 1994? It means that if the governing documents and their provisions regarding insurance and the provisions in TUCA 82111 regarding insurance conflict, so that TUCA's requirements would invalidate the provisions of the governing documents, the governing documents provisions control, okay? We're gonna talk about a little bit more about this in particular, but the point I wanna make here is that just knowing that 82111 applies retroactively is not the end all be all. We still have to go and look at our governing documents with respect to what they say for insurance. If those provisions of the governing documents conflict with what anything is said in 82111, we're going to default to your governing documents. So let me kind of give you an example of how this exception to the retroactive application applies. For a pre-1994 condo, we always default to 82111. This means the following. For stacked buildings and non-stacked buildings, I want to define what I mean by a stacked building. A stacked building is when units are on top of units. If there is no, if in a building there is no unit on top of a unit, it is a non-stacked building. Okay, so for these pre-TUCA condos, if they are non-stacked buildings, that means under 82111, the condo association insures just the common elements and owners insure their units. Okay, for stacked condos that are pre-TUCA, 82111 is going to say the condo association insures the common elements and the units, less any installed betterments and improvements. Betterments and improvements is a phrase that comes straight from 82111, and let me tell you what this means. It means that if the units were originally constructed with, say, carpeted floors, okay, and an owner came in the owner's particular unit and installed wood floors. That wood floor is not a part of the original construction, and that wood floor would be considered a betterment and improvement, which means the association's insurance obligations under 82111 for stacked buildings requires the association only to insure the unit for original construction, i.e. carpet, as opposed to maybe more expensive hardwood floors, okay? But the analysis doesn't stop there. While we default to 82111, we know that if there's pursuant to 82002C, if there's a conflict between TUCA and the governing documents control. So let me show you how this would arise. For pre-TUCA condos, and let's say it's a stacked building, if the declaration expressly uses clear express language that says the association insures both the units and the common elements, then the association most likely would have to follow the declaration as opposed to TUCA. Notice how those are in conflict there. Similarly, for stacked buildings, if the declaration expressly states that the association only insures the units and not the common elements, which is in conflict with what TUCA provides for stacked buildings, the association generally will follow the declaration's insurance requirements, which would mean it insures only the common elements and not the units, okay? That's a key distinction. Texas courts have ratified this statutory interpretation. The Bosch case basically said exactly what I'm telling you here is we are going to default to the governing documents if there's a conflict for a pre-TUCA condominium. All right, so we've got some good case law that is supporting this built-in exception. So, quick key takeaway for those of you that are dealing with, let me actually back up. Let's just do a quick summary here. If your declaration was recorded after January 1, 1994, the good news is you get to default to TUCA. Generally speaking, declarations for those condominium associations and their insurance provisions will track what TUCA says. So that's a definite benefit for you guys. Always go back and consult your governing documents, even if you're a fully governed TUCA condominium, but you have it a little easier. For those pre-TUCA condominiums, the real key takeaway is we can't just rely on 82111 for our insurance obligations. We need to go back and review the governing documents. It would also be prudent to get a legal opinion on what you have to insure and not insure. And then also, it's always wise to engage your insurance agent. Talk to the insurance agent about what the insurance agent is seeing and what the association needs to insure. I will tell you, insurance agents and you all as property managers, us as lawyers, we kind of speak a different language than the insurance agents. And the carriers speak a totally different language. I'm going to highlight that later. So you guys going out, being proactive and communicating with, hey, what do we need? We want to buy the right insurance is important. I have on this slide, I raise a question. What if the declaration states that the association insures the buildings? Okay. What does that mean? Does that mean I just insure the common elements? Does it mean I insure the common elements in the units? In order to reduce risk, generally speaking, buildings are interpreted to include both the units and the common elements. But that's kind of highlighting an issue where the declaration might be drafted very concisely without much detail and therefore without much help. So sometimes we need to read more broadly some of these terms that are used. So if building is used, I would default right now from your insurance obligation to include both common elements and units. Again, if you want a written legal opinion, that would be good to verify what your particular association is required to insure. And let me give you, this is a real example. I want to give you an example of a pre-TUCA condominium. This is a language pulled directly out of the governing documents to kind of highlight this insurance issue. Again, it's a pre-TUCA condominium, which means 82111 does apply retroactively, and that's where we default to, meaning the association would have to insure both the common elements and the units. But however, this is the language from the declaration. It says clearly that the association has to provide insurance on the common elements. However, it uses express language. Each owner shall obtain his own insurance upon the units. And it goes into detail of what that includes. It also says the association at the very bottom shall not be responsible for the procurement or maintenance of any insurance covering the contents or interior of the unit, which generally the interior of the unit is what the association is going to cover under 82111 for a stacked condo. And I failed to mention this particular condominium is a stacked building. I think it's a 16 floor high-rise tower. So I want to give you an example of language straight out of a declaration that is in conflict with 82111's insurance provisions. And in this particular case, this particular condominium association defaulted to the governing documents, which meant they only were required to insure the common elements. I use the phrase only required to insure the common elements, and that raises a question: can the association go out and buy more insurance, i.e. insurance not only just the common elements, but also the units? Depending on what the governing documents say, the answer may be yes, the answer may be no. The concern is whenever an association buys more insurance than it is authorized to buy, or that it is required to buy, the concern is that the association is taking an act outside of its authority that could be challenged by an owner. That's always the concern. So we may have the right to buy more insurance. That's something that we're going to want to look at specifically in your governing documents. But if you don't have that right, that's our caution and concern of, if you don't have the right to buy more insurance than is required, the concern is you're taking acts beyond your authority that could be challenged by an owner. And we want to be cautious there. Okay, I want to shift gears. One of the things that's kind of coming up here a lot is, well, why don't just owners with these water pipe issues, why don't owners just submit on their claim or on their policy? This is originating out of their units. I've heard things, well, the owner's negligent, they should just do this, and the association's not going to file a claim on its property policy. The legal question here is that addresses these general issues and questions is, whose policy is primary, the association's or the individual owners? Well, pursuant to 82111, to this insurance provision again, the association's property insurance policy is primary, okay? What that means is owners can still buy their own insurance, and that insurance may cross over and cover property that the association's policy also covers, i.e. the interior unit in a stacked condominium. So even though owners might have insurance that covers this same property, the association's policy is primary, and therefore the association has to submit a claim, okay? That's why right now, and you should already done it, is even though owners might have unit damage, even though leaks may have originated in the units, even though leaks may have been caused by the owner's negligence, and owners certainly need to submit claims on their policies, the association must submit a claim on its property casualty policy. We do not want a situation where the association has insurance that would have covered repairs and hasn't been submitted. That would probably lead to a legal challenge by an owner. Keep in mind, owners are paying assessments to pay the premiums and deductibles for these policies to cover events just like this. So the key takeaway from this for you guys, from me, my standpoint is, I want you to submit claims, and your legal reason why you're required to is TUCA is saying your policy is primary. So as you see in some of these bullet points, even if the owner carries insurance that would cover the same damage, the association needs to submit a claim because its policy is primary. Even if the leak originated from the unit, the association needs to submit a claim. And even if the owner's negligent acts caused these leaks, and it was 100% the owner's fault, we still need to submit a claim. And I know that kind of sounds backwards, and the question is, why is that the case? Well, the answer is public policy. The Texas legislature enacted the Uniform Condominium Act. So it is a legislative public policy decision to say we are going to shift the burden to insure the entire building and in stacked buildings, the interiors of the units to the association and not individual owners. And let me tell you one of their justifications why. If you don't do that, we are relying on 100% of the owners to buy 100% the proper insurance. And if one owner fails to do this, we might be left in a situation where the association does not have enough money to fully repair and rebuild the condominium association. That would be very bad for our board members and owners, because if you have a section of a building that cannot get repaired, the marketability of everybody's units suffers. And keep in mind, the main goal that we all are trying to achieve here is to preserve property values. So the legislature is sensitive to that goal, and through this policy decision of making the association's policy primary, is trying to protect that issue. So if you guys are contemplating or being faced by board members with the question of, well, we don't need to submit a claim, this is the owners needed to handle this with their policies, here is your answer. Deductibles. Obviously, we're going to have some deductibles here. So who pays the deductibles? Chapter 81 for you pre-TUCA condos is silent. 82111K addresses deductibles and it applies retroactively. So this is going to be our default provision, our default legal source for deductibles. And what 82111K says is, look at your governing documents. If your governing documents are silent, do not address who pays deductible, then it's a common expense of the association. That means the association pays it and all owners are responsible for paying of the deductible. However, if the declaration or bylaws dictate how the deductible is going to get paid, if it says the owners that are going to be the benefited owners who get repair damage, they're going to pay it, so on and so forth, you follow what your declaration and bylaws say. 82111K also says that the board has the ability to adopt a policy to dictate the responsibility for the deductible. Okay, so the takeaway here is 82111K for deductibles is saying, look at your governing documents. If they're silent, it's the association's paying it. If they dictate who pays it, follow that dictation. Again, if they're silent, the board can adopt a policy, and that policy could be a myriad of things. It could be assessing it on a certain percentage. Again, those benefited directly for the repairs, so on and so forth. So one of the things that you might want to look at is potentially quickly adopting a policy on how the deductible gets handled. Adopt that policy, get it written, get it recorded with the county. Then you've got an argument that's enforceable. But that's your big takeaway for deductible. All right. I've been hard on the associations and easy on the bad guy owners from a standpoint of the association's policy is primary. We've got to submit a claim, so on and so forth. But that doesn't mean I'm going to totally let off the hook the bad guy owners. Let's just say, we've already talked about it. If the owner is 100% negligent, we still have to submit a claim. But that doesn't mean that negligent owner is totally left off the hook. 82111L says that if damage to a unit or common elements is caused in whole or in part by basically the negligent acts of an owner, then the association may assess the deductible and any uninsured expenses against that owner. So if you're in a situation where your condominium association had a single pipe leak, and let's say that came from one unit, it came from a pipe that is solely within the unit, and we know that the unit never lost power, but maybe the unit didn't turn on their heat to a sufficient level, maybe did not drip or run the faucets, things that a reasonable person would hopefully do. You might have facts there to say that the owner's negligence caused the pipe to burst. And under maybe facts like this, that the association can levy that deductible expense on that particular unit owner. I will say for, I think, a lot of the situations where we've had multiple pipe bursts and where we're dealing with different issues, I think we need to take a case by case and look for each particular break in the pipe, and was that particular owner negligent in that particular situation, to see if we can levy all or a portion of the deductible on those potential owners. So I'm raising this, y'all, from a standpoint of, well, the deductible is going to be probably a common expense or something where your governing documents would dictate it. 82111L could shift the deductible payment to a negligent owner. So I want you to be aware of that out there, something that you can raise to your boards from a standpoint of, hey, if you have high deductibles, this could be something worth investigating to see if we can shift that expense to a potential owner. Also, when you're dealing with plumbers, contractors, maybe even the adjusters, obtaining information from them to investigate the facts of each particular unit issue and gather facts to make a determination of whether the owner was negligent. So taking pictures, taking videos, invoices, work orders, any witness statements that you have to say, hey, this is what was going on in this unit to support that claim. You'll want to gather that from a standpoint of an analysis of shifting the deductible. Another thing that I hear quite often with respect to issues where it seems clear that the owner's negligence caused the damage, clients will say, well, okay, I understand our policy is primary and our policy is going to pick up the load here. And fortunately, we had a smaller deductible, $5,000. We're going to bill that to the owner. But the question comes, well, Grant, our premiums just increased. We just found out our premiums increased, and we believe that it increased as a result of this owner's negligence and the claim we had to submit on it. We hadn't had increases in the past. And so the question is, can we recover those increased insurance premium costs against the owner? Unfortunately, the answer is no. Texas and other jurisdictions have looked at this and said that is a consequential damage that is too remote and therefore is not legally collected. So to the extent you all have questions from board members on this, hey, we're going to be dealing with increased premium costs. Let's go after the negligent owners here. To the extent that there were negligent owners, that is not a damage model that we can legally collect on. So for better or worse, that's the answer. So again, quick takeaways in dealing with the owner related issues is work with the association's adjuster, work with owners adjusters who are on site, your contractors, plumbers, electricians, so on and so forth, gather those facts to support a claim of negligence. I know there are high deductibles out there, so this is the groundwork that we're going to need to do to potentially be able to shift the payment of those deductibles onto the owner. Want to now shift gears to insufficient insurance or underinsurance. This is going to come into a situation, and hopefully we're not going to run into this, y'all, but this is a situation where if the policy limits are not going to be high enough to cover all the repair costs, okay? So I'm going to use round numbers. Let's just say our policy limit on our property casualty policy is $1 million, but the total repair costs due to all the sustained damages is, let's just say, $1.5 million. That means we're going to have $500,000 of uninsured repairs. So that begs the question of, well, what happens? Who's going to pay for that? We've got some statutory guidance, which I've set out below. And there's a bit of a conflict here. For those pre-TUCA condos, 81207 addresses this insufficient insurance issue. And it says that the owners directly affected by the damage are going to bear that additional cost. The question that comes to mind is who's directly affected? Is it the owners of units that are going to that sustained actual damage and going to receive the repairs? I think that's what the statute means, but we don't have any case law guidance that I'm aware of on this. I think an argument can be made that every owner is directly affected by a loss. So that's our provision. So if you're pre-Tuca condo, you may be able to levy the cost of repair, the uninsured cost of repair, against just the directly affected owners, the ones that are going to benefit through repairs of the unit. However, we have 82111I. Again, this applies retroactively. This says it's a common expense. Common expense means it's levied against all the owners. So it's just a general expense that everybody pays. If this becomes an issue, let me say this. If underinsurance becomes an issue for a particular property, and that property is a pre-Tuca condominium, it's my strong urging to go talk to legal counsel on how do we cover these uninsured costs. Because on the one hand, if you levy them against everybody, those owners that are not getting repairs of their units are going to point to 82102 or 81207, pardon me. On the other hand, the directly affected owners are going to point to 82111I. All right, so you're going to need some legal guidance on how to navigate that. But I wanted to raise an issue for those pre-Tuca condos if we deal with insufficient insurance. Now, I want to give you a quick example. I'm not sure how many people have had the pleasure of reading an insurance policy, your property casualty policy, but I wanted to kind of give you an example of a property casualty policy on a condominium association. Most property casualty policies will look very similar to this once you finally get into the coverage language. And mind you, policies can be 30 to 100 pages long, but this is kind of the general meat of it. It's going to say something like this. We, your carrier, we, the insurer, is going to provide coverage for a loss to covered property, all right? Generally speaking, a policy is going to define loss to include things like freezing issues, pipe bursting, pipe leaks. So I am not concerned here with whether or not this is a covered loss. What I wanted to highlight here is what is property that is actually covered by the policy as opposed to what is the property that is not covered. What we've been talking about is the difference between units, common elements, and betterments and improvements. And what you're going to see here is, I'm going to flip the slide, business personal property, that's going to deal with more tangible stuff. Let's get to the actual real property in the buildings. The policy is going to define buildings, and it's going to go through a litany of things. But I want to highlight down number 7. It says, if not covered by other insurance, the association's property casualty policy is going to cover alterations within or on the exterior of the existing buildings. All right. Notice that doesn't say common elements. In fact, when I word searched this policy, the phrase common elements was not included in the policy at all. While it does say units, it doesn't use common elements. This is a highlight of where the policy and the carriers are speaking one language and our governing documents in Tuca are speaking a different language. This is where we need to get on the same page. And how we get on the same page is obviously talking to legal counsel, talking to management, obviously you guys, but then engaging our insurance agents to kind of bridge the gap and translate things. I'll give you another example. D at the very top, it says it's going to cover appliances used for refrigeration, ventilation, cooking, dishwashing, and laundering that are not contained within individual units. That's interesting. Look at number 5. If not covered by other insurance, alterations and repairs to the buildings. So we've got issues where we're moving from the primary policy to a secondary policy to the extent that there's no insurance. This is where it's going to be very tough for all of us to give owners accurate information on who is supposed to cover what. We need to really be able to look at our policy and the owner's policy and understand what's going on. I think being transparent, making our policies available to owners and their adjusters is going to be key. Let's look at another provision. Number 6, it says the association's policy is going to cover any of the following types of property, notice this, contained within a unit if your condominium association agreement requires you to insure it. Well, the condominium association agreement means the governing documents, your declaration and bylaws. This ties into what we talked about before with respect to we've got to go and look at our governing documents to find out what we insure and what we don't insure. We're going to insure the common elements. We know that. Do we insure the units? Do we insure the betterments and improvements? Does the owners insure personal property? So on and so forth. That's where we're going to want to go and look at those provisions. Go to 6C, paragraph 6, subsection C. It talks about fixtures, installations, additions owned by unit owners comprising that part of the building within the unfinished interior surfaces of the perimeter walls, floors, ceilings of the individual units. That's starting to use a language from TUCA. This is where the policy starts to pick up some of the legal language that we're so used to. So I'm just pointing this out to y'all, and I'll let you guys scan the rest of this from a standpoint of the policy doesn't use the same language that we're used to seeing, okay? But in general, just know we're defaulting to what is in our governing documents in TUCA for what is insured and not insured. And I'll just leave in this some of these example policy language. Now, I want to tell kind of a quick story. This deals with a fire and not a leak issue or pipe bursting. But here's my story. This is the peril. Condominium association a couple years ago in Dallas, a 3-floor 60-unit condominium association had a fire and burnt to the ground. It was a complete loss. And the issue in this matter was the HOA was underinsured, did not purchase enough insurance. Here's what happened. The association, the building burns down. The association submits a claim to the property casualty carrier. They start adjusting the claim, and it's determined that the cost to rebuild the building, common elements and the units as they were originally constructed, was going to cost $23.6 million. Okay, that was the replacement cost to rebuild the building. The association's policy limits were $8.7 million. They only had, or $5.87 million. That means we were grossly underinsured. This community was grossly underinsured and did not have enough money to perform the necessary repairs, in this particular case, rebuilding. What this led to, what this is leading to for our purposes is that we need a lesson on valuing our properties and knowing what we need to buy. So one, we need to determine what type of insurance we're going to have, and we've talked about that in detail. We really want to focus on step 2. We need to determine the amount of coverage. Okay, property casualty policies normally come in 2 forms: replacement cost value and actual cash value. Let's talk about what that means. 82111 of TUCA says property insurance, that the association needs to obtain property insurance in a total amount of at least 80% of the replacement cost of the insured property or the actual cash value of the insured property. Actual cash value means the cost to repair or replace less depreciation. I'll tell you, it also has a legal definition of the fair market value. Generally speaking, the policies that you're going to purchase are not going to be actual cash value policies. They're going to be replacement cost policies. I want you just to understand that there is a difference between those. You need to look in your governing documents to see if the requirements, what the requirements are. Is it actual cash value or is it replacement cost? And what percentage of either we have to buy. And then you need to take that to your insurance agent and make sure we're buying the right one. Replacement cost, just to give you a definition here, it is not the fair market value of the building. It is what it's going to cost to rebuild the building in today's dollars. So without the depreciation taken out. So I think a real quick summary, the difference between actual cash value and replacement cost is actual cash value is less depreciation. Replacement cost includes the depreciation, okay? Next thing we need to do is we need to determine what's the actual amount of insurance. In that example I gave you, we had less than $6 million on a property that was going to cost over $23 million to rebuild. So whatever policy we have, actual cash value replacement cost, we need a value that is going to be accurate for the full replacement if that's the case. So how do we do this? We need to get an appraisal. We need to get appraisal on not the fair market value of the building, but again, the cost to reconstruct. So you need to consult with a professional. Contractor, insurance agent, there are various services out there, Marshall Swift Valuation Service, Xactimate. These are all tools to value a building's replacement cost for reconstruction. You need to think about how frequent you're going to perform this valuation. Look in your governing documents. I have seen governing documents that say that this evaluation needs to be done annually. And when I see that and talk to the board, a lot of the times they haven't done it in a long time. Okay, so we need to think about right now with respect to our policies, are we buying enough insurance? So who has the duty to obtain this appraisal and set the amount of insurance that we're going to buy? It's the board, management, insurance agent, carrier. All right. Generally speaking, the default is going to be to the board. They are the elected body that is going to operate the association. So the general default would be the board. Potentially maybe management. I have seen governing documents that say the board purchases insurance unless there's a management company, and then the management company has to do that, which is kind of silly, y'all, in the sense of you all as a management company might not have signed up for that duty. Agent carriers. I think my initial thought was, well, hey, it's got to be the agent. Hey, the agents who we're going to buy insurance, they're the professional, they're the expert in this area. They should tell us the amount of insurance that we need to buy and what insurance we need to buy, replacement cost or actual cash value. Well, come to find out, that's not the law. Agents and carriers have a very low duty, and that is this. An insurance agent has a duty to use reasonable diligence to place the policy requested. That means the agent has to buy for you what you request. And the agent has to tell you if they can't do it. Okay, this is a very low standard. One case in Texas interpreting this said, and I quote, any obligation of the insured, so the HOA, to obtain a certain amount of insurance, i.e. $23 million for this example, does not extend to the insurance agent. Now think about that. We have volunteer elected board members that have maybe never read an insurance policy in their life. And they're by default the ones that are supposed to determine what insurance that the association needs to buy and the amount of it, okay? And that we don't get to lean on the agent. So how do we shift this? One, we can't assume that anybody's just taking care of it for us. We've got to make sure we've got a handle on it and advise our boards. We got to disclose everything. Let's disclose everything in writing. Get everything over to the insurance agent. In particular, we have got to send the insurance agent our declaration, Uniform Condominium Act. We've got to make specific requests of the insurance agent, i.e., our governing documents, Mr. Insurance Agent, Miss Insurance Agent, require us to carry 100% replacement cost insurance. We need you to buy that. And also, we need you to tell us how much to buy so that we can fully rebuild it. Then the agent has been requested to place a specific amount of insurance and a specific type of insurance, and that now shifts the burden, in my opinion, onto the insurance agent. The point is, let's be aware of these issues and start talking about it with our insurance agent. If we don't, we're left with insufficient insurance. We've already talked about who's going to pay for this. Well, not only who's going to pay for the repairs, but what happens if there's not enough money, possible special assessments. We might have depleting reserves. We might have to reach into a reserve fund. We don't want to do that. Again, we talked about this, highlighted in my example. This community could not rebuild their building. They didn't have enough insurance. It forced, in this particular example, it forced many owners that had lived in this particular location in Dallas, which is a very desirable location, to move far away. They couldn't afford to live in this area, so forced relocation. And then there were claims, there were lawsuits filed against the associations and their officers and directors. We don't want an underinsurance issue to come about. Now, obviously, we are at the mercy of what we have purchased now. If this is an issue, start the groundwork now with respect to digging up communications with your insurance agent. What if any appraisals were done? When were they done? Start that process to get ahead of this game. The resulting peril. Going back to my example, what ended up happening here? Well, obviously there was insufficient insurance, and that led to a lawsuit. An owner sued the association, officers, directors, and management. The association then, out of their own pocket, had to pay lawyers to sue the insurance agent and the carrier. Of course, with any lawsuit against the association submitted claims to their general liability carrier and the D&O policies. But because of certain exclusions in those policies, coverage was denied. So the association was paying out of pocket their costs to defend the owner's lawsuit and out of pocket their affirmative claims against the insurance agent and the carrier. This all resulted by having not enough insurance. Very bad situation. I want to just kind of talk about this subject, kind of using my example as parlay here. I'm sure everybody has got concerns of, and maybe owners are accusing the association of doing something improperly and threatening things and potentially filing a lawsuit. If the association is sued, we've got our two main policies, your general liability policy and your directors and officers policy. Those provide different layers of protection. And I'm not going to belabor the point, that's not for the day on what they protect. But these sort of policies, we want these in play. We want to submit claims on this because the carriers are supposed to provide two different duties for us. One is a duty to defend. That is the duty for the carrier to pay your legal defense costs. This is where litigation really can hurt our communities here. The defense costs for lawsuits on this can be extraordinary. So we want to have a carrier in place here. So your GNL and D&O policies, we want them to provide a defense. The second duty that these two policies provide is, at the end of the day, if there is a judgment, a duty to indemnify. That's paying off the judgment. Again, a detailed discussion of that is not for today, but I'm putting this information into this PowerPoint so you have a resource to go, okay, we've been sued, what does that mean? And you can pick up, contact legal counsel and give the board some direction. What I really want to focus on is, obviously we've had these events, we've had these leaks, we've submitted claims on our property casualty policy. What happens if all of a sudden we've got owners making allegations and demands on the association? I know there are displaced owners that are having to incur hotel expenses, food expenses. What happens if these owners say, hey, the association, you messed this up, you could have prevented this, I want you to reimburse me these costs? Or if an owner just hauls off and files a lawsuit. Okay, what happens? Let's talk about what the policies tell us, because we default to what the policies tell us to do. Policies generally state that the insured, so the association, must submit to the carrier a claim of loss made during the policy period. Okay. Claim is normally defined by these policies as filing a lawsuit, which for years, that was how the claim was defined solely. It was just the filing of a lawsuit, which meant the HOA, as the insured, only had a duty to notify the carrier of a claim when there was a lawsuit filed. However, over recent years, carriers and the groups that draft these policies have expanded the definition of a claim. So in addition to a claim being the filing of a lawsuit, it also includes, a lot of times, a written demand for monetary or non-monetary relief. So what does that mean? Well, it could mean a formal letter from the owner's attorney. If the owner hires an attorney and sends a letter that's 4 pages long that tells you all the things you did wrong and said, give me $20,000 for my damages, that would most likely be a written demand. However, the definition is more broadly defined. It could be just a vague, simple email from an owner that said, you've done all this wrong. I've been damaged. Pay me money. Okay. The point is, if we get any sort of communication right now from an owner or the owner's attorney or agent that says, hey, you've done something wrong, pay me some amount of money or fix my unit or something, we've got to consider that a claim under your property casualty policy and a claim under your GNL and DNO policy. And we need to have a discussion on submitting that claim. My recommendation is that you would submit all those written demands to your insurance agent and ask the insurance agent, hey, is this something we need to submit a claim on? Move this decision on whether or not we have to submit a claim off of you all as managers, off of the boards, and on to your insurance agent. They're the professional, let them guide us in that. Another important reason is if the insurance agent makes a mistake on the decision, say says, let's not submit a claim when one ultimately should have been submitted, or says we need to submit a claim and I'll submit a claim and fails to, then the agent's E&O policy is in play, and it's another potential pocket of money to protect the boards and our clients. So the takeaway here is I want to be real sensitive and put you guys on notice that any sort of written demand needs to be taken serious and a potential claim, and let's get it over to the insurance agent. I want to highlight an example. Had a client where an owner was upset about a particular issue. And in 2017, it sent an email that said, you've messed up, HOA, you owe me $2,000. Sent another email in 2018, sent a letter and another email in 2019, and then in July 2019, filed a lawsuit. In between that time, the association's GNL and DNO policies turned over, carriers changed, and they had this exact language. And the association never submitted anything to either carrier until the lawsuit was filed in July of 2019. And both carriers came back. Both carriers under the policy get to obtain information on prior demands. And so the association had to give those prior emails and letters from the owner to the carrier. And the carrier said, hey, these were prior claims. You didn't timely submit them. And even though they would be, this lawsuit would be covered under either policy, because they weren't timely submitted, we are denying coverage. We don't want that here. That's why I'm saying let's be hyper sensitive. One other note, whenever we talk about submitting claims, I know there is a concern and sensitivity to, oh, well, if I submit a claim, my premiums are going to go up. That's not actually accurate. Just by submitting a claim doesn't mean your premiums are going to go up. They will likely go up if the carrier starts to incur any expenses on this, i.e. legal fees, paying your duty to defend, legal costs, or paying out on a claim. But just the act of submitting a claim generally does not trigger a premium increase. The other thing is, and I think everybody would understand this, is with the amount of claims that are going to be filed, premiums are going to go up anyway. I don't want to take up any more time here. I've gone way over. I do want to get to a couple questions that were given to me. One question was anticipation of litigation, damage to personal property. What about negligence for maintenance of roofs, pipes? My answer here is this will likely be an issue raised by your adjuster to deny claims. I don't think this is a claim that an owner is going to raise. I doubt we are under any standard to have taken actions to prevent pipes bursting from 0-degree weather. Another question that was presented was thoughts on documenting reasonable efforts to mitigate damage and file a claim timely in the case the association is sued. I think we just talked about this. Do it. Make sure we're hypersensitive on that. Respond, communicate, file the claim. One of the things that we've been recommending is engaging a plumber on retainer, so you have somebody there to help things, just with the demands on plumbers being so extensive. Is the claim an association makes for the damage only one claim, even if multiple units are involved? That's a great question. Generally, most of our property casualty policies are going to be a one claim, one deductible policy, which is good. However, the policy will dictate it. There are some policies that have deductible provisions when you're dealing with separate multiple leaks, but generally it's going to be one claim and one deductible. Next question, how does a maintenance matrix affect an insurance claim? Is there a potential for conflicts? This is a great question. There is a dichotomy and a misunderstanding between maintenance and insurance. A matrix is a guide for who is supposed to fix or repair a specific item or area when there's wear and tear. That goes out the window when there is an event that is covered by insurance. So who is supposed to maintain what, and what a matrix says about maintenance becomes pushed aside when there's insurance in play to cover the repair. And that is highlighted by the association carrying primary insurance on units. Keep in mind, you all know this, owners are generally responsible for the maintenance and repair of their units. However, the association has an obligation potentially to insure the units. And if there's an insurance event that is covered, then we're not dealing with that matrix. Communication strategy regarding the claim and the status to owners, what should be included, what shouldn't be included, any guidelines. I think one, you need to have a single point of contact with your adjuster. Be that one board member or manager, I think the adjuster to efficiently do things needs one point of contact. With respect to owners, be transparent. Share the adjuster's information, share the carrier's information, share your policy, answer questions. I went a lot longer than I anticipated. I apologize, but that's kind of what I had to offer today. Want to be available to answer questions.
Yeah, thank you, Grant. This was extremely helpful, and I'm hopeful that those attending won't mind if we go a few minutes long, because there's a couple outstanding questions. I think you touched on them, but since they were brought up again, let's see if you can answer them again for us. So
yeah,
first question that came in is, if the damage to a unit is less than the association's insurance deductible, does the association file a claim? Now, that's the first part of that question. The second part is the owner responsible for repairs to their unit?
The answer is no, don't file a claim. And then yes, if the governing documents or potentially TUCA as well say this particular item or area is the responsibility of the owner to fix, then that's on the owner. So that's a great question. So we're going to want to pay attention to what is our deductible and what is our cost to repair for, all the resulting repairs and damage. And if those repairs and damage are less than the deductible, we are not submitting a claim. And that's where your maintenance provisions and your matrix come back into play. And that's where, for the area that broke and the area or areas that were damaged as a result of the break, you're going to look at each particular areas and you're going to go to those maintenance provisions in the matrix and go, okay, the pipe broke, this pipe is pursuant to the matrix is the owner's responsibility, the owner has to fix. This particular area that had damage, that's the owner's responsibility. This particular area, oh, well, that's a common element, that's the association's obligation to fix. So you're kind of a la carting the maintenance and repair. That's an excellent question.
So in situations where you might not be sure if the damage will exceed the deductible, so the question is just that. Should you file if you are unsure if the damage is higher than the deductible? Is the answer?
Yeah, you should. Water just goes everywhere, and water is going to go from the units to the common elements, and it's going to cause damage. It's going to require, drying, mold remediation, probably some repairs. So I would say if you only have one small leak, maybe hesitate, maybe hire a contractor or plumber to kind of give you an idea of the extent of the damage and the cost. But if you have what looks to be a larger amount of damage, my recommendation is go ahead and submit a claim and work with your adjuster. And your adjuster is going to get out there, take a look, and your adjuster is going to help guide you on, hey, I really don't think the damage is all that much. I think it's going to be X. which is less than your deductible. So maybe we pull back.
Okay. The next question that came in, should associations consider increasing deductibles to minimize claims?
No, I understand the question. The TUCA talks about purchasing insurance with commercially reasonable deductibles. And what does that mean? The statute doesn't define it, and case law hasn't defined it. But the point is, the legislature is giving some guidance on, hey, we don't want to force associations into certain deductible expenses. We want you to buy a policy that's got whatever commercially reasonable means. I would think we would be going beyond the statute and kind of outside of that guidance if we are actively searching for a policy that is going to be a high deductible with the intent of, hey, this will limit our exposure with respect to filing claims. I think if a board's doing that, I would have some concern that they are not acting in the best interests of the association. Now, I think that being said, talking to your insurance agent about, okay, what policies are out there from a coverage standpoint, not only what is covered, but the amount of coverage like we talked about, and then what are our premium costs, what are our deductible costs. You know, if you gather some more information, then you're starting to exercise some good faith and due diligence to make a determination that maybe buying a policy under the facts of your investigation with a higher deductible, it is a good idea for your particular situation, your particular community. But as a blanket, I wouldn't say let's just go out there and buy a policy with a high deductible.
Okay. The next question, it builds off the previous question, not the one about increasing deductibles, but the one before that, if the damage is kind of on the borderline there. So the question is, if damage may not exceed the association deductible, should owners be advised to file a claim as well until a final cost or decision is determined?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely yes. And I would just go one step further. I would say our communication automatically right now needs to be, if you were affected in any way by this owner, whether or not we're going to have coverage here or not from the association standpoint, you need to file a claim, very similar to what we talked about from a standpoint of don't not file a claim and walk yourself into a situation where a carrier could deny the claim. I think we need to kind of educate owners on, you don't want to walk yourself into that situation. Don't wait on us. We're going to go, let's work concurrently, file a claim so that you don't prejudice yourself in the event that the association doesn't have coverage for a myriad of reasons, one being our deductible is higher than the repair costs.
Okay. Next question up is, if a unit is vacant and mold develops as a result of stagnant water, water just left over, is the owner liable for not taking action? And then the second part of the question, what about a situation where a unit might be in probate? So there's not like we don't really know who the owner is at this stage. How's that handled?
Good question. Both of those are going to be very fact-based issues. So there's not a real good blanket answer. I think if an owner is leaving their place vacant and they are not communicating with you all, especially in a situation like this, hey, I'm out of town, what's going on? They're not investigating, especially if they are not responding to any communications that you all have sent. Hey, Mr. Owner, Miss Owner, your unit suffered a leak. You need to get in here and do some things. Yes, I think the owner could have some potential liability there. But again, keep in mind, hopefully our insurance is going to cover a lot of the areas where mold would get on the walls, especially the insides of the walls, to where we're going to mitigate those issues. Now, if the owner doesn't do things, let's say, obviously, let's just give an example. If water gets on kitchen cabinets, wooden kitchen cabinets, and that's not something that we're going to get into, we're not covering, and the owner is not taking any action on their own to do that, and that leads to a pervasive mold issue. that would be kind of a change in the facts where I do think the owner has some liability there. With respect to the probate deal, if we're in a situation where we don't have a good point of contact, or we even really don't know who has the authority to make decisions on behalf of the unit, that does put us in a precarious situation. I think my firm, other firms could help identifying, who, if the unit is in probate, and who's the executor, who's the attorney, to help with getting contact points so that we can get communications. I think written communications in both of these situations to the owner or whoever the agent is in control would be key for preserving liability claims if they're not responsive and not taking care of the unit. So unfortunately, I think we got to do a little proactive due diligence there. And it might be a situation where if we notice that they're not doing anything, we need to send them written notice that we're going to go into the unit. We're going to cure the problem under, emergency entrance provisions in both the Uniform Condominium Act and most likely our governing documents, and that we are then going to assess those costs against the owner. Those costs, generally speaking, would be secured by the association's assessment lien and thus foreclosable. So that puts us in a situation where we can pass those costs off onto the owner, and through foreclosure have a collectible means of enforcement. So I'm not just blanket saying doing that, but I think in general, those are some ideas and options that are out there.
Okay, thank you. So last question, at least it looks like it. Do you know if there's any federal funding available to associations as a result of the Texas freeze?
I don't, but we're waiting to find out if something's going to happen. I know the president issued Texas a state of emergency, but I don't know if FEMA or if any other agency that could jump in is going to provide any funding yet. But I will say this, if I hear of anything, I will let your all's office know, Nat, so that you guys can distribute that to all of your managers and your clients.
Okay, perfect. Well, Grant, that looks like that's all the questions that we have that have come in. So with that, the last thing, would you mind if we share your presentation with our managers and boards outside of this?
Yes. No,
okay.
Go right ahead.
Excellent. Thank you. So with that, it looks like everything that has come in, and I'm going to hit stop on the recording. And thank you, Grant, for your time.
Thank you. And I apologize for going over.
No problem at all. But thanks everyone for joining, and we will see you all next month.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.